Hello, everybody. This is Ted Gothier with Michigan CNC Webinars. We would like to welcome you to our monthly webinar, which is the first Tuesday of every month. We try to have a monthly webinar. Once in a while, we'll not have one or we'll delay it because of a holiday. But if you're on the notification list, you'll get an email in the mail 1 week before the webinar and the day of the webinar to remind you that we're going to have one that evening. Once again, we like to thank you, and we try to record these things on YouTube. So if you go to YouTube and you search Michigan CNC Webinars and Tips, you should be able to see the recording. We try to get the recording up within 2 days after it's been recorded. Tonight we have a special guest presenter, Randy Johnson from New Wave Automation. Randy has written a book about CNC, and he's going to give us some pointers on how to use certain features in VCarve Pro and some of the metric software. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to pass the presentation role over to Randy, and then Randy's screen will show up, and we're going to go ahead and let him go on with his presentation. So thanks again, Randy, for taking the time out of your day to help us out and let us learn a little bit about CNC.
Thanks, Ted. Well, hi, everybody. Yes, I work with Next Wave Automation right now. I've been around CNC for about 20 years, the last 10 or 12 years primarily with the smaller desktop machines. Got into it back in the 90s when I worked for a cabinet shop when we installed a big industrial cabinet making CNC machine here in Minnesota. And then about 10 years later, I was working for a magazine called American Woodworker Magazine. And we started reviewing CNCs in the magazine. I ended up with about 5 machines in our shop. And that was a real heyday of having all those machines to work with. And left the magazine about 8 years ago and have gone back out to the machine world. And the last year or so, I've been with Next Wave Automation, primarily working with Woodcraft and Rockler stores and other shops around. Anyway, tonight I'm going to give you a little overview here of some 3D clip art work in VCarve. There's actually quite a bit in VCarve that you can do just with the existing clip art, as well as the basic V-carving and other techniques that are in VCarve. I meet a lot of people who talk about getting Aspire, and I encourage them to start out in VCarve and cut their teeth on that because Metric has made VCarve actually a very robust program. About the only thing you can't do in that program is to actually create 3D models, but there's a lot of modification you could do with existing models. Also, along my road here in learning CNC and working and doing a lot of training, as Ted mentioned earlier, I co-authored a book, CNC Router Essentials with George Driska, who some of you may know. He runs the Woodworkers Guild of America online and DVD business. We put this book together a couple of years ago. It's been pretty popular with beginners, which is exactly who it was intended for. For all the classes that I teach, I find that a lot of the same questions kept coming up, and we found this to be a good way to document those questions to give people starting out a good basics in understanding it. And it sounds like by some of the comments that came early on that some of you have got quite a bit of experience and some of you are just starting out. So tonight I'm going to start fairly basic, but tonight is about working with 3D clip art, and what you see on your screen here is the model that I'm going to create for you tonight and show you a couple of tips and tricks along the way. And it's a 3/4 inch piece of material, about 10 inches square. I'm going to start over. I'm going to close this file and start over with a new one. And we'll start out with the basic single-sided setup, 10 inches by 10 inches by 3/4 inch thick. For most of the carvings I do, I put the material 0 point at the top. Convenient. For this one, I'm going to put the XY datum in the middle. And for modeling resolution, just a standard resolution works fine for this. For those of you familiar with vCarve, and for those of you who aren't, down at the bottom here you have 4 tabs down at the lower left, which offer you drawing, modeling, clipart, and layers. And we're primarily going to use the drawing, modeling, and clipart tab tonight. So to start out, I'm going to go in and actually I'm going to open up my Toolpath window on the right side. I want to take a peek at this area on the right side. This is the model position of the model. We're going to see this later on, how this applies, how we position our part inside the model. But right now, the first thing I'm going to do after that is open up my model tab over here on the left. And as I go through this tonight, if there's something you don't understand, I guess you could raise your hand and throw it in chat. Otherwise, towards the end, we certainly cover any questions you have as far as what I did. We can go back and look at the process the second time, so it's clear to you. Okay, so if we take, and I'm going to go up to my 3D tab here, click that on. In fact, I'm going to rotate this up. And right now, this gray or brown area at the top is referred to as the modeling plane. And because we have our Z set to the top, you can see the location for the Z and the XY at the top. If I were to change that over here on the right side, put it to the bottom, you can see how it shifts to the bottom. So I can toggle that back and forth. I encourage people when they're working with models, because it gets a little confusing with the different planes and the Z levels, to play around with the toggles a little bit, these radio buttons, and just understand how things are happening. Right now, this button in the middle right, which sets the location of the modeling plane, doesn't have any action because there's no model in there, so it's not going to have any effect on what we're looking at. The next thing I'm going to do is go back over to my modeling window, and in the upper right, there's something called add a plane component with a 0 height. So when I click on that, what I have done over here in the middle is I basically have added, think of it as a piece of veneer with 0 thickness. Now over on the modeling setup for the position, I can move that to the bottom and to the top the same way as I did with the Z0. But again, the slider doesn't have any effect on it yet because it has 0 thickness. So to continue with our setup, the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to change this modeling plane. This is one of the tricks that makes this type of dish design easy to do. I'm going to open that up, open up the editing window here, and I'm going to change the name of that from 0 plane to material. And I'm going to give it a base height of 0.75, which is really a thickness. What I essentially have done now is I've drawn my material block and made a solid component out of it, changing that 0 plane into a piece of wood. The height is 7.5. If I change that to 0.5 instead, we can see over here in the middle how it is a 1/2 inch thick. Now when I go over to the far right and put a slider up and down, I can move my material up and down inside my material thickness. And if I change my Z0, all that does is change the position of the Z0 from the top to the bottom. And I'm going to set it back to the top, go back to the left side, change my thickness back to 3/4. So now I have my material block. close that window. I'm going to go down to the bottom here to my Clipart tab, open that up, and go down to my objects and people. And actually before that, I want to go to my dome. And for this setup, I can pretty much select any of these domes because even though they come in with a fixed height and dimension or diameter, I'm going to modify that. So I'm just going to double click on this one and go back to my modeling tab. So what we see here is if I turn off my material, there's my dome. And when I turn the material back on, the reason it's inside the material is because when I double click on this, it is set to merge. So it's blending in with the regular piece of material. What I want to do is make it subtract, and it'll reverse the shape of that, make it a concave shape out of that piece of material. I'm also going to change the shape height. Right now, if we look over here, you can see that pink area in the middle. That means that's because the depth, the height of our shape is 0.8, which is thicker than our material. And you can also see that over here because we're getting air on the right side. It actually tells us our material thickness, our model thickness is too thick for our material. I'm going to go back over to the shape height on the left side, put in 3/4 and tab, and now everything's good. My material thickness or model thickness on the right side is 7.5, and I don't see that pink shape. Oops, there, what happened there is I just dragged that model because it's active. And you could actually do dragging. In fact, if I drag it out to the edge here, it's kind of another little way you can see a little cross-section of what that looks like. But to put that back in place, I will go back to my drawing tab and hit my center on material, put it back in place. Now the next thing I want to do is I want to enlarge the diameter of this. So I'm going to go in and select my set selected object size. It shows me I'm currently at 5.5. I'm going to increase that to, let's try 9, and bring it out to the full size there. Now you notice down here this little setting that says Auto Scale Z. If I change that, if I have that selected, and I make this small again, it will also shrink the height of that shape. Well, I'll show you what happened. We'll go back to the modeling and we'll open up the dome, and we see that we're only 0.41 high now. So if you want to auto scale the Z height of a shape, when you scale it, you could use that little selection box. But I'm going to let it scale back up, so we're back to 3/4. And now we have our basic dish shape. Next, I want to add the shape, which is inside object. I'm going to add this bottle cap. Again, just double clicking, places it in place. Go back to my drawing tab, open up my size, and for this one, I'm going to go ahead and let it auto scale, and we'll see what happens. But I want that to be about 7. Let's see how that looks. Maybe make it a little bigger, 8. Okay, close that. Go back to modeling tab. And right now, our overall height is set at 0.5. And that's about where I want to be. But I'm noticing here that this green, that is showing me that some of my cap is down inside that dome and I'm losing some of that detail. So what I want to do here is I want to give this a little base height. I'm going to make the height of this bottle cap 0.25 and then give it a base height, which is like the foundation around a house. It's just a straight, come on, my keys aren't working here. Let's see here. 25. And let's check something else here. Make that a little bigger. Five. Okay, we're going to just live with that for now, and we'll go back later and do some adjustments to that. But I'm looking at these two together, and that gives me a height of 0.625, or 5/8 of an inch. So I've got about 1/8 of an inch yet to work with in my overall height of my model. Again, showing you something similar to what we did before. If I take this model and I move this out to the edge, and let me turn off my dome here a minute and my material. This straight edge on the right, on this lower side here, that's what's called the base height. But that's just helping me lift this model up through that dish shape so that it protrudes through the top. Again, it's easy enough to get that centered again. Go back to my Clipart, and now I want to find my mug. Double click that. And now again, notice the mug is showing up green, and that's because the mug is set at merge, which is just blending with the cap below it. So I'm going to change that to add. And that elevates it up. But now we also notice on the right side, I'm getting an error because my model overall is too thick. So I need to go into the beer mug and change that height down. See if that gets us in there. So now we're back to the height we want. I'm also going to go in and make a couple other changes here. I'm going to change the size of my cap a little bit. Double click on it. Take that down to about 7 inches. Oh, let's see here. And then I'm going to take my beer mug, and I'm going to change the beer mug, make the beer mug a little smaller too. And move that up like that. So now I have my basic 3D model shape. And we can see if we zoom in here, you can see that little flat edge on the cap. That's the base height, just starting to show itself. And I like that because that means the full shape of my model is up above my dome. So I'm getting as much relief as possible. Okay, so now that I have that, and as you noticed, I did most of that work all in the 3D window. I go back to the 2D window, I can see my 3 shapes. Now, something that sometimes happens when you're looking at the 3D shape, sometimes if you want to take and move this around like that, sometimes you can't see the shapes in the order you want like that, like what's going on. Well, mainly what's going on when I'm looking at this is because the dome is selected, that's what is hiding everything else. If I off-click to the side, The other thing that happens is that these shapes are stacked up in the 2D view in sort of a layered-like approach. So where you have moved to front to back, if I move my mug to the back, it actually disappears now from my view. And if I move the cap to the back, that also disappears too. So I can't even find any of them. I might be able to select one if I grab it. There's the beer mug. Now I'm going to take and move that to the front. Now it's visible. Now let's see if we can find the cap. There's the cap. I'm going to deselect the beer mug, move the cap to the front. But now my beer mug went to the back because the last one you move to the front is the one that takes priority. So I'll go back and get my beer mug, select that, move that to the front. And now in the 2D view, I'm seeing everything I want. At this point, I'm going to close this material window because everything over here looks good. I'm going to add some text to this window. And let's just go in here and hit and I tend to just type it in and I'll fit it later. Select mine and I'm going to center it to the left and right. Move it down a little bit, stretch it a little bit, move it back over to center. Might be just a little big, move it down a little bit more. And now I have that, my text. There's a little more text that I want to, well, let's see. I'm going to jump forward now to the toolpath, and we're going to come back and add some more text later. But the basic toolpathing for this design, if any of you have done 3D carving, you've got these two toolpaths up here. One's a roughing and one's a finishing. And the roughing does exactly what it says. It's just going to rough it out, and then the finish will give it the final carving. But for a design like this, I like to have it, when you open it up, it gives you some options up here. Model boundary, material boundary. Material boundary, of course, is the whole board. The model boundary, in this case, is going to be the same thing because we actually have that whole material block as a model. So I want to create something for selected vectors. So I will just do the carving inside a vector area. But to do that, I need to have a vector, and I have no vectors over here. So since I know that my dome is 9 inches, I can go in and create a circle with a center point of 0, 0, 9 inches. Great. Now I have a nice circle going around that shape. I select that vector. For this setup, I'm going to use a 1/4 inch end mill. And it'll depend on your machine what your depth of cut or your step over or your feed rates are. And then also I'm using an allowance. This leaves a blanket of material over the top of the model that'll be carved off by the finishing tool. But I usually leave about 20 thousandths. I usually find that works pretty good. On the Z level versus the raster follows the shape of the model, whereas the Z level leaves more of a stair-step type of carving. In fact, I'll just demonstrate the Z level, and we'll take a quick look at this. So there you can see the blue lines represent where the tool is going to cut. Let's preview that. And so there you see the stair-stepping shape that it leaves. I don't usually use this one because the finishing tool has to cut through all these thick edges, and I prefer to use the raster instead. Sometimes it takes a little longer, but I'm okay with that. So if we preview the raster one, As you can see, it's removing a little more material and following the shape of the model a little closer. Next, I'm going to go back and get my finishing tool path. For this one, I'm going to use an 1/8 inch ball nose with about a 9% step over. The recommendation is somewhere between 7 and 11. I usually find right around 9 or 10. It leaves me just a slight amount of sanding. You go down to 7, which will leave very little sanding, but it does take much longer. If you go below 7, you're kind of wasting time because it's just such a small step over. And above 10 or 11, you start to get significant markings that require quite a bit of sanding. So it depends on the material again. It depends on how much detail you have in your project as to what step over you want. But somewhere in that 7 to 11 usually works pretty well. Again, I'm just going to accept all the defaults here and click Calculate. You notice here that the blue lines are very dense, and that's because of that very close step over. There's a little, for a 1/8 inch bit, the step over in that, if we open that up and take a look at that, the step over is only a little over 10 thousandths. So it's a very small step over. We'll go ahead and preview that toolpath. And there's our finished shape with pretty good detail. Now, depending on the type of 3D model you're carving, I've actually found, and some of you have probably done this as well, is that you can, with a dish shape like this, you can often skip the roughing toolpath altogether and just go straight to the finishing. What you have to be aware of is that the finishing toolpath, if we look at the edge here, it's cutting just right at the surface of the model. So in the middle, it's cutting a lot of material out. But the reason it sometimes works to skip the roughing is that because the toolpath is starting at the edge, and I'm going to slow this down. Let me do one more. I'm going to back it up just a second here. Trying to stop it. There we go. Okay, let me do it one more time. Okay, it's starting at the edge, kind of like at the edge of a shore, very shallow, and it's going deeper and deeper. So at the shallow point, it's putting very little stress on the 1/8 inch router bit. But once you get into the deeper material, because we're only taking off about 10 thousandths of an inch, that also is putting very little stress on the router bit. What you have to watch for in situations like this is that when you do the preview, if your router bit jumps over to a new area and plunges down, then this strategy of just using the finishing path is probably not the right strategy, because if that 1/8 inch bit were to plunge down in some deep area and start cutting, there's a good chance that you'd break it off. But because the roughing path can take a lot of time, I will often skip it and just go straight to the finishing and save some carving time. Okay, now we're going to do the text. We'll go back over here and grab the text. And I'm going to grab the carving. I'm going to use a basic 1/2 inch 90-degree bit. I'm going to accept all the defaults here, hit calculate. And there again, you can see the blue path for where the cutting is going to happen. So I'm going to go ahead and preview that, and we'll see what happens. And nothing happened. And here's why nothing happened. Because if we look at the edge, we zoom in here, right there, that V-bit toolpath is set to cut on the surface of the material, basically. And we want it to cut on the surface of this cap, which is about an 1/8 inch below the surface. So there's this little setting inside the V-Carve Toolpath down at the bottom here called Project Toolpath on the 3D model. And when I click this, notice just watch that toolpath. It'll jump a little when I hit calculate because it's going to drop down on top of that cap, bottle cap. There, so it dropped down a little bit. Now it's on top of the bottle cap. Now we preview it. It'll carve nicely right in the bottle cap. Okay, there's one more bit of text that I want to add, and I'm going to go back to my 2D drawing, bring up my text tool again. I'll type in a little more text. And I want to lay this text along the dome on this curve right here. So I'm going to bring up this tool, which is Text on Curve. I'm going to select the text, hold the Shift key down, and select that, and it automatically drives it right down onto there. Now, I don't really like how that looks, so I'm going to start playing around with the settings a little bit. The first one I'm going to just jump to is hit Align to Curve, which will straighten out the letters a little bit. And then I'm going to go up here to text spacing and increase the text spacing. Thought that looks pretty good. That does look pretty good. The next thing is I don't want it right on the edge. I want to move it in. So I'm going to put offset distance. Let's offset that by about 1/4 inch. Go a little further. There we go. Now, that worked quite smoothly for doing text on a curve. But sometimes when you start doing text on a curve, some really weird things can happen. And the reason for that is primarily because if we select just our circle and I go into the node edit mode, which is right here with the right click or the N key on your keyboard, that green dot at the top, that node is the start point of this circle. If that node were over here, and I can move the start point like that, now when I go back, and if I select my text again, and select my circle, and I go up and hit text on a circle, notice what happens. It suddenly moves it opposite of that start point. And that's not where I want it. So if for some reason you're working with a curve and you're wanting to lay the text on a curve and you're not getting the results you want, go into the node edit and start messing around with the start point. And try again. Let's see. Oh, it's asking me if I want to node edit my text, and no, I do not. And that's because I'm in node edit. Notice the shape of my arrow. There's no arrow shaft on it. I need to get out of there. Now I'm out of just right click, or you can hit the N key, toggle back and forth. I'm going to select my text, select my curve, and now it pops back in its location. Anyway, there's lots of interesting options. You can, do it on the line or above the line. You've got that offset available. You can flip it to the other side of the line. There's a lot of flexibility. The real trick, though, is figuring out where your start point is, because that's the one that'll throw you. That's the one that'll throw you the curveball usually. Okay, so I'm going to go back to this. Now I'm going to go back to my V-Carve Toolpath, open it up, select that text also, and hit calculate and preview. And it actually projects it nicely down at that curve, that dish shape. It's projected onto some fairly, pretty gentle type of dish shapes or domes. It does a nice job. If you get something that's extremely curved, it won't do a very good job of it. But for gentle curves, it does a nice job of projecting it. I guess at this point, does anybody have any questions?
No questions? I really like the point that you made with the start. I've always had problems with lining up the text like that, and I was using every option there, and I never really even gave it too much thought about where the start point was.
Yeah, it's almost like it'd be great if they had right in here someplace as a warning, look at your start point, because it really plays a big role in it.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, Randy.
Yes.
I have a question. Would you work the same way trying to put a dish on the open book that's in the Clipart?
So the open book, do you know which section this is in?
Is it in panels?
I think it's in objects and people.
Is it? Okay. Oh, this one here? This book right here?
There's a little delay from when you talk in the pictures in my screen.
I'm sorry.
Yes, that one right there. Yes, that one right there.
Okay.
I was going to try to put the wedding rings in a dish on that book.
You want the book and a wedding ring in a dish shape.
Yeah, the wedding rings in a little dish on the one page of the book.
So let's look at this first. So we have the book. I'm going to need to add some base height to bring the book up, maybe a little bit more. Okay, generally speaking, I've got the book pretty well elevated now, and then you wanted to add the wedding rings on top of that.
Yeah, well, the book was not in the dish. The book is just the book, and then have the dish on one page with the wedding rings in it.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Got it. Well then, and you're going to cut the book out. You're going to profile cut the book out, so that'll be the final object, just the book.
Yes.
Okay. In that case, if I could work through this, let me turn the dome off, turn the material off. And
Wait, Randy, would it be too much? Would it be too much problem to start from the beginning so that people can follow along right from the beginning on this project?
Sure, not a problem. Let me set this whole thing up,
and then we'll walk through this project.
And you said there's quite a delay in my talking in the pictures.
Not a lot, just a few seconds. On my end, I don't know if everybody else is having it or not.
Okay.
Yes, it is on my end too.
Okay, that can be annoying. I will try and adjust for that. I'm just going to close this out then. Well, actually, what I'll do, I'll just reduce that one. We can come back to this one if people have questions about that one. Let's see here. Let's do this here. And okay, so we'll start a new file. We'll use the same basic settings we did on the last one. Are you going to be using 3/4 inch thick material?
I was using 1-inch thick.
Okay. For this setup, I would probably, I'm going to give it a try here. I would probably just try and work just with the clip art. I've imported the book, and then I'm going to import the rings. And one of my working styles is I tend just to kind of collect parts and kind of sketch with the software, and then I go back and refine everything later. So I just like to put everything in one spot. Now I can go back to my modeling tab. In this case, I'm going to take the rings, click on the rings, and I'm going to bring the rings forward. Now, is your plan to put the dish in the center or just on one page?
Just on one page.
Okay. Let's see what the 2D looks like. Okay. So obviously I got some work to do here. So we'll go into the modeling. I'm going to take the dome and make the I'm going to make the combine mode subtract because I want it to like that. The wedding rings. Actually, this is an interesting point. You notice how on the left side here, the order of these, right now the wedding rings are below the dome, and actually moving those above reveals the rings, but I also am going to change the combine mode to add to bring them fully on top of the dome. And this light spot that I'm seeing here is because I think my dome is too thick. So I'm going to change the thickness of the dome, and that brings it up a bit. Might need to shrink it down a little bit. In this case, I don't need to necessarily add the zero plane or the material because I'm building off the modeling plane itself. So does that help?
Yes.
Is that sort of what you were looking for?
Yes, it is.
Okay. Yeah, part of the trick in working with Clipart, it's this is a good example right here where I don't use the zero plane and create a material block. When I'm just doing the dish shape with the previous example is when I do use the material block. If you're carving down into a material block with your shape, then it's good to start with that. But in this case, your finished object, the book in this case, is your final project. And in this case, I would just build on top. Other questions?
Jerry, were you going to present this as a wedding gift?
Yes.
And were you going to have writing on the left-hand page?
Yes, correct.
So that'd be V-carved.
Yes.
Okay. Interesting.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
So
then,
that projecting text example that I gave earlier would apply to this book as well.
so then you'll just cut the shape of the book, and the actual book will be the outline of the thing. The book won't be inset in anything else. It'll just be the book.
No, it'll just be the book.
Okay. Very nice idea.
So when you have a situation like that, if we actually look at the toolpaths for this, you know, I drew that circle before, but here I need a line to profile around that. I can carve it. I'll just do a quick carving on this. And okay, so here's another example. When I brought up my carving tool, this window often pops up because either you have an error or it wants to ask you where do you want your material. So right now my model, the book, is only about 0.4 thick. So I can make it thicker. As you mentioned, you're going to go all the way up to an inch. So in that case, I could go over to the book, open it up, make that, let's try it an inch, see if that works. Now I've added a lot of thickness to that book. My dome and my rings are still working pretty well. And I've made full use of the shape, the thickness of the material. I would definitely use a roughing on this one. I would not do a finishing only, but I am just going to use it. This time I'm just going to use the finishing just to show you what it looks like. Now we still need some way to cut this out around the edge. And for that,
You use a boundary border.
right up here, and that creates a nice little vector around the edge, and then you could set up your profile toolpath. Setting up the profile toolpath, whatever your preferences are, selecting the bit of choice.
Now, you also got to keep in mind, too, if you want to put text on that page, you need to change your vector so it looks like it's following the page because the page is not exactly flat.
Yes.
Right, so you would,
You got to manipulate the vectors where you're going to put your text so that it follows the up and down of that left page. Otherwise, it looks kind of funny.
right, so you rotate it a little bit, swing it in. And if you want to get creative, you could actually use that text on a curve, and you could actually create a curved line for that text to follow.
I've done one of the books before with just text and used the distort feature.
Oh, that would work too.
But
Yeah, so the distort feature, that's not a tool I actually use a lot. It's right here though. And then you can use that to follow a line as well.
But for some reason, I could not get the rings to show up in the dish, so I just did used a Google image.
And V-carved it.
And then that.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, in this case, you could also, if the dish is one option here, but you could also potentially just put the rings on the book like that also.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, I like that.
I like that. I like that much better than the dish idea.
Yes, I
And
do too.
the other thing that's nice about that is it really will cut down on the carving time
Mm-hmm.
because you don't have
I do
to
like that better.
you don't have to carve out that dish.
Well, if you want to get really fancy, you could actually put their names on the rings too. So,
Is that the 201 class?
yeah, exactly.
Now, if you did that, if you put their name on the ring now, is that just project to the
Yeah,
3D drawing? Just like that again? Okay.
yeah. You would just
I say, do you mind just showing us to do that?
not a problem. I'll show you. What I'm going to do is I'm going to turn off the book just to make it easier to work with, and I'll take and go back to my text here and bring that down and edit my text a little bit. Let's see. Oh, you know what? Since it looks like VCarve has changed sometimes how you can edit, and it looks like since I rotated that, it's not letting me edit it. So what I'm going to do, since I can't edit it, I'm going to just delete it since I can't edit it and go back and create some new. What I'm doing here is drawing a couple of vector lines, and I like just to draw this little dog leg and then go into the node edit mode, which is the N key on the keyboard, and the nodes show up, and then by hitting the S key on my keyboard, I can hit smooth, and then by hitting smooth, it'll even that out, and then I can use the handles, shape that curve to how I want it. So smooth the point. In fact, here's a little tip. Use as few nodes as necessary. In fact, in this case, I don't even need this middle node. So I can actually go down and delete this middle node.
You don't even really need the second line because those curves are probably going to be identical. You could copy it.
Probably. Hang on just a second. The sun is setting and it's in my face. But just in general, I like to use as few nodes as possible because it makes managing shapes a lot easier. It makes for a smoother curve. Okay, so let's see what we can do with this. So now I'm going to go in and select this text line and hit apply on a curve. And do the same with this one. probably some more work you could do with this. I'm going to take and let's just shrink this down a little bit. Once you've got it in the curve shape, you can start to move it around a bit. It'll still maintain the basic shape. And so now that we have that, I'm going to go in and get my V-bit, select that text, select my project toolpath on 3D model, I need to go back over and turn on my book. And I am going to do one last thing just to recalculate all toolpaths. And it's giving me an error. It says I'm too thick. So what happened here is probably that when I added the rings, it added a little bit of height to the overall model. So I can see I have just a little bit. So I need to go back into the book. And lower that down a little bit. Click OK. And now that they're all calculated, I can go back into preview and preview all toolpaths. And let's see if that worked out. So you've got, again, we're seeing here, this is pretty small. So you probably have to work with a different, maybe rather than a 90-degree bit, I would probably select a 60-degree bit on this instead. Give me a little deeper cut without making the letters any wider. Make them a little more refined. And part of the resolution here is just the display I'm looking at. But that's pretty close.
Mm-hmm.
Other questions?
Brady, I had a question about when you were talking about having a lower number of nodes on the arc.
Yes.
Is there a reason for that? Because that isn't getting carved, right? Or is it just for processing?
It really, in this example, it really didn't matter. But if I were to take this curve, right now I can control that curve with those two nodes real easily.
Okay.
If I had a third node in there, I'll put one in there. Now when I pull those out, now I have to deal with three nodes, and it's like, how do I get that shape? It's just a little harder to get a nice curve out of those three nodes rather than the two nodes.
Understood. Yeah, that makes sense. Thank you.
Yeah, and again, in this application, it probably didn't apply a lot, but I tell you what, if you start going around a shape like this or something more complex, what I do, so like, let's say, you can see all the nodes that are in this one that it created. It's probably even more than it needs. Let me just give you a quick example. I'm going to delete that line. If I were to manually trace this with the tool, again, this is my approach. Not everybody does it this way. I use the straight tool, and I tend to start at the high point, a low point, a high point, a low point, high point, and maybe even skip that point because it's so shallow. So let's just take that curve. Now when I look at the nodes, I've got a bunch of straight lines. Then I go in and I use the S key on my keyboard to smooth it. And I smooth that one. This one I'm not going to smooth. I'll show you why, because we want a nice V down there. And then I've got all my handles. Now I'm going to go back over here and just grab that down a little bit. Grab that down a little bit. And I'm actually going to delete this one for a minute to see if I can get by without it. And over here, pull that one in, pull this one down here, pull that one, pull this up a little bit. So again, I've just defined that edge, a nice smooth edge with just those few nodes. Now, notice that when it's a blue node, both handles work together. And that can be a little, and the length of it affects things too. So it takes a little practice to understand node editing with those arms. This black one is a split node. You still have control over the arms, but they work independently of each other. And you can actually toggle back and forth on a blue node. If I hit S key on that again, it'll go from blue to black. Now it's a split node. And if I hit S key again, it'll make it connected again. Just again, one of the things you need to learn about when you work with the nodes.
That's perfect. Thank you. Sorry for taking them off topic, Ted.
Oh, no.
No, this is the topic. That's great.
It's Q&A, so that's the topic.
That's the idea of these webinars, is to be able to just help our education and knowledge. And I think we got a lot of really nice tips. We're at about 20 minutes after right now, so I think we're just a little bit over an hour, so I think we'll try to wrap it up. Anybody got any other questions you'd like to ask Randy before we close out this session? Okay. If that's it. No questions?
No questions other than I'm buying his book.
Okay. How do they get your book? How do they get your book? Randy?
So, thanks, everybody. Appreciate it.
How do they get your book? Can they go?
Amazon.
You can
Amazon for about $19.
Yep.
On Amazon. Okay.
Yep.
Thank you very much, Randy.
Okay, thank you, guys.
Okay, well, Randy, I want to personally thank you and from everybody else for taking the time out of your evening. We know that you're a quite busy guy over at Next Wave Automation, and we all learned an awful lot tonight. We really appreciate it. And just want to remind everybody that we have these webinars first Tuesday of every month at 7 p.m. Eastern Time. If you'd like to be on the notification list, just send me an email. Please don't text me. Send me an email, and I'll get you added to the notification list. We use the same username and password for each one, so once you're on the notification list, you'll get the instructions on how to log in. We're not going to have a meeting. We're not going to have a webinar in October, but in November, we've got Jim Cook, who is going to be our presenter. So we'd like to thank you for joining us tonight, and hope you have a good month doing your CNC.